The adjudicator's voice came over the bridge speakers every 90 seconds, flat and untroubled, and Commander Adaz had started to hate the sound of it more than she hated anything the Calyx Dominion was doing to her fleet. 11 Calyx hulls destroyed, it said, 406 human, and moved on to the next update before the number had finished landing in the room. 11 minutes in, and the display board's light had dimmed with every hull that went dark, the way a room dims when someone keeps closing curtains a person hasn't noticed opening. Adaz did not close her eyes. A crew that saw its commander flinch remembered the flinch longer than it remembered anything that came after. The Calyx line moved across the tactical display in a lattice so even, so unhurried, that it took her a moment to name what was wrong with it. It wasn't aggression. It was boredom. 9 species had voted humanity a seat at the Concord trials, 8 as a joke, 1 out of pity, which was worse, and Marshal Orant's fleet was fighting like a species that had already collected on the bet. Adaz checked the chronometer. 14 minutes. Close enough now. She keyed the fleet-wide channel and gave the order she'd been dreading since the manifest first came across her desk 3 days earlier. Commit the reserve. All of it. 3 days earlier, in a briefing room lit by one dying panel that nobody had gotten around to fixing, Adaz had pulled up the Calyx match archive and told her second-in-command to stop looking at hull counts and start looking at mass. Lieutenant Priya, who had spent 6 hours arguing that the human delegation's obsolete drones stood no chance against anything the Dominion fielded, went quiet when the manifest resorted itself by tonnage instead of number. A Calyx cruiser massed as much as 40 human drones. The Dominion had spent 4 centuries fighting other fleets built on Calyx-scale hulls, trading cruiser for cruiser, husbanding reserves because a marshal who lost too many of those expensive decades-built ships in one engagement didn't just lose the match, he lost standing no lifetime could rebuild. That caution wasn't strategy anymore. It was older than the trials, worn smooth by repetition, and no Calyx commander alive had needed to question it, because no one had ever handed them an opponent whose whole fleet weighed less than their own reserve. The adjudicator, Adaz reminded her, didn't count hulls. It weighed wreckage, and the human delegation had been given 400 cheap, disposable, nearly weightless drones as an insult, which meant, if the math held, that every one of those drones that got close enough to put itself into a Calyx cruiser wasn't trading evenly. It was trading up, 40 to 1 up, if the range closed to nothing and the hit was guaranteed instead of merely probable. Priya asked what close enough meant and did not much like the answer. It meant no reserve. It meant sending a fleet forward on a heading with only one outcome that wasn't defeat, and it meant that the officer who volunteered to lead the flank taking the worst of it would very likely not fly home. Priya took her own squadron in on the left anyway, and said, in the flat, unhurried voice she used only when something frightened her, that she'd rather it be her giving that order in the field than someone junior hearing it secondhand. Adaz letter. There are orders a commander gives and orders she lets stand, and the difference is a kind of respect that doesn't have time to explain itself out loud. Minute 19. The human formation crossed into knife range in a shape the Calyx tactical computers had no name for, because it wasn't built to survive contact. It was built to guarantee it everywhere, all at once, with nothing held in reserve to matter afterward. Adaz had Priya's channel open on a sideband, mostly so she'd know, and she heard the particular sound of controlled breathing under a suit mask, in through the nose, held out slow, the rhythm of someone talking herself through a burn she'd already decided to fly. Then, the proximity alarm on Priya's line, a short, ugly double tone, nothing like the calm cadence of the adjudicator's voice, and the breathing broke rhythm, went fast, went ragged in a way it hadn't been trained to do and did anyway, because bodies don't take orders as well as fleets do. Then a burst of static that ate the sound whole. Then nothing. Not silence, an open channel with no one speaking into it, which was worse, because it kept sitting there insisting someone might still say something. Adaz did not close the channel. She watched the tactical plot show her, in cold blue vector lines, what the audio had already told her in the language bodies use instead of words. The left flank's rhythm stuttering, a formation missing the officer who'd been holding its edge together. She had promised herself, 3 days earlier, that she would not let one loss, however precisely she knew its name, talk her out of an equation she'd checked twice. She kept that promise. It cost her something she didn't have a word ready for yet, and wouldn't for a long time, and she gave the next order anyway, because the fleet that stopped now had spent everything for nothing. For one breath, watching the wreckage of the left flank keep drifting forward and keep firing anyway, dead in the water not being the same as finished, no one having told the targeting logic otherwise, she thought, distantly, that no species in the conquered still remembered, in its bones, what it was like to have nothing left to protect, except the outcome itself. The Dominion had 4 unbroken centuries teaching it caution. Humanity had 4 centuries, full stop, and hadn't yet had time to learn that running out of things to lose was supposed to feel like losing. She put the thought away. There wasn't room for it yet. Minute 22. Marshal Orant's cruisers hold formation, conserving the reserve exactly as 400 years of doctrine says they should, confident the human fleet will simply run out of hulls before it runs out of targets. Minute 24. It isn't running out. It's closing. Calyx point defense cuts down drone after drone at range, and every kill logs clean and cheap on the tactical board, except the ones that don't die at range, the ones that eat a hit and keep coming anyway. Trailing fire, correcting course with whatever thruster survived, aimed at nothing but the nearest hull, big enough to matter. Minute 26. The first drone reaches ramming range and puts itself into a Calyx frigate's engine section. The explosion is small by cruiser standards. The tonnage the adjudicator logs against it is not. One nearly weightless human hull, traded for a warship built over 3 decades. Orant's tactical staff sees the number and does not yet understand what it means. Orant does. Minute 27. He breaks formation to commit the reserve early. The first time in his service he has ever done it out of order, out of the unhurried rhythm his whole doctrine was built around. Because the alternative is watching a ratio finish somewhere 4 centuries, never once imagined it finishing. It is the wrong moment to learn a new rhythm. The reserve enters already reacting instead of anticipating, chasing a collapse it was never trained to chase, and the drifting human wreckage it has to move through keeps firing through it, because a fleet that decided at the start it would not exist by evening doesn't stop deciding that just because the shooting is almost over. Minute 29. A compact, unglamorous cluster of drones that used to be the left flank puts 3 shots into an oncoming Calyx cruiser at a range so close it shouldn't have been survivable for either side, and the cruiser it hits is carrying a disproportionate share of everything Orant has left. It goes dark. The guns, all along both lines, finally go quiet. "11 human hulls remained out of hundreds. The Calyx Dominion had lost more tonnage in 29 minutes than in the previous 4 centuries combined. The ratio favored humanity by a margin so narrow that a Concord archivist would spend a full day rechecking the adjudicator's arithmetic out of pure disbelief, and find nothing to correct. There was no cheering on the human bridge. Adaz stood in front of a display gone quiet, in the particular way displays go quiet, after spending half an hour being loud, and read the final tally twice before she let herself believe it. The casualty manifest had Priya's name on it, and it would not update again, and the adjudicator's number, precise as it was, did not know that name, would never know it, and had not been built to. Orant requested a private audience before the closing ceremony, an honor his service rarely extended downward and rarely offered with anything but performance when it did. Adaz accepted, because refusing would have cost more than attending, and stood across the table from a commander whose fleet she had 3 days earlier considered essentially unbeatable, and listened to him say that his service had spent 400 years training to defeat every kind of caution an opponent might bring against it, and had never once trained against an opponent that had none left to bring. She told him humanity hadn't planned to have none left either. It had simply run out early, and only afterward discovered that running out early wasn't the same as losing. The 8 delegations who had voted humanity into the trials as a joke did not laugh again. The one who had voted out of pity did not offer it a second time. Somewhere in the adjudicator's ancient archive, the match was logged beside 4 centuries of Calyx victories as a single anomalous line, and beneath it, in the same flat register it used for every verdict it had ever rendered, was a note no one had asked it to write, appended anyway, because the pattern, once observed, had become part of what it now watched for. Species designation, human, committed reserve, total, doctrine observed, none. 9 species had granted humanity a seat at the table to teach it its size. Watching the tally close, none of them could say any longer what that size actually was, and the not knowing sat in the room afterward the way a held breath sits in a chest, unresolved, uncomfortable, and very clearly not finished yet.